Well, it finally boiled over. Patrick Mahomes just confronted Stephen A. Smith live on Instagram, and honestly, it's been building for weeks. After the Super Bowl loss, Stephen A. tweeted, "No more talk about Mahomes being the GOAT," then doubled down on air.
Patrick Mahomes may be the greatest quarterback we've ever seen. It's the first time in his career I've seen him embarrass himself.
Mahomes is finally firing back, and what he said might just shut Stephen A. up for good. Years of tension finally explode. What happens when one of the NFL's greatest quarterbacks finally reaches his breaking point with sports media's most controversial commentator? The story begins long before either man knew they'd become the central figures in one of sports media's most compelling feuds. Patrick Mahomes entered the NFL in 2017 as a first-round draft pick with unlimited potential, while Stephen A. Smith had already established himself as ESPN's premier provocateur, known for his bombastic style and willingness to challenge even the most celebrated athletes. But here's where the narrative gets fascinating. Smith wasn't always the Mahomes supporter many might remember. In fact, early in Mahomes' career, Smith expressed significant skepticism about the hype surrounding the young quarterback, famously stating in a resurfaced quote, "Look, everyone's talking about Mahomes like this dude is the second coming of Dan Marino, and I'm like, excuse me, can he play a couple games first? What have y'all seen?" This early skepticism would prove to be the foundation of a complex dynamic that would evolve through triumph, controversy, and ultimately confrontation. As Mahomes exploded onto the scene with his 2018 MVP season, throwing for over 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns, Smith was forced to recalibrate his position. But true to his nature, Smith never simply admitted he was wrong. Instead, he began crafting a new narrative that would become central to their ongoing tension. The first major flashpoint came in January 2021, during what many consider one of Smith's most controversial takes regarding Mahomes. On First Take, Smith suggested that Mahomes' success was heavily dependent on his supporting cast, particularly Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill.
Give me Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. I tell you that Deshaun Watson could be his equal.
The backlash was swift and brutal. NFL Hall of Fame quarterback Kurt Warner immediately took to Twitter to defend Mahomes, calling Smith's comments disrespectful and emphasizing Mahomes' unique talent that transcended his supporting cast. Warner's intervention elevated the controversy, framing it as a clash between media sensationalism and player expertise. For Mahomes, who had maintained his characteristic composure, this public defense by a respected former player must have been both validating and frustrating. Validating because it confirmed what he knew about his own abilities, but frustrating because he needed others to defend achievements that spoke for themselves. What makes this period particularly intriguing is how Smith's approach revealed his broader strategy as a commentator. Rather than simply analyzing Mahomes' performance, Smith was constructing narratives designed to provoke debate. The tension escalated significantly in December 2023, following one of the most controversial moments in Mahomes' career. After the Kansas City Chiefs lost to the Buffalo Bills 20-17, a potential game-winning touchdown was nullified due to an offside call on Chiefs receiver Kadarius Toney. Mahomes' reaction was visceral and uncharacteristic. He slammed his helmet on the sideline, yelled at referees, and later called the officiating terrible in a heated exchange.
Terrible. Worst call I've ever seen, man.
The NFL announced it would review Mahomes' comments and behavior for potential fines. Smith pounced on this moment with characteristic fervor. On First Take, he declared that Mahomes had embarrassed himself with his furious protests, arguing that the offside call was correct and that Mahomes' reaction was unbecoming of a reigning NFL MVP.
Patrick Mahomes may be the greatest quarterback we've ever seen. It's the first time in his career I've seen him embarrass himself.
This critique struck differently than Smith's previous comments. While his 2021 remarks about Watson had been about football analysis, this was a character assassination. Smith was essentially arguing that Mahomes had revealed a fundamental flaw in his leadership and composure. For a quarterback whose brand was built on clutch performance and level-headed decision-making, this was a direct attack on his identity as a player and leader. What Smith perhaps didn't anticipate was how this moment would begin to shift public perception, not of Mahomes, but of Smith himself. Fans began questioning whether Smith's critiques were motivated by genuine analysis or by his need to generate controversy. The fact that he chose to focus on Mahomes' emotional reaction rather than the broader context of the game, including the Chiefs' 33 dropped passes that season, suggested to many that Smith was more interested in headlines than truth. The relationship between the two men entered a new phase as Mahomes continued his historic run. Despite Smith's critiques, Mahomes led the Chiefs to consecutive Super Bowl victories, establishing a dynasty that forced even his harshest critics to acknowledge his greatness. But Smith, ever the contrarian contrarian, found new angles of attack, focusing on the Chiefs' perceived dependence on favorable officiating and questioning whether Mahomes could maintain his level of play without his elite supporting cast. The most telling aspect of this evolving dynamic was Mahomes' consistent refusal to engage directly. While other athletes had publicly feuded with Smith, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and John Wall among them, Mahomes took a different approach. He let his performance do the talking, maintaining the professional demeanor that had made him one of the NFL's most marketable stars. But as we'll see, this restraint had its limits. As the 2024 season progressed and the Chiefs pursued an unprecedented three-peat, Smith's commentary became increasingly focused on the GOAT debate. He argued that if Mahomes achieved the three-peat, it would cement Patrick Mahomes as the greatest quarterback in the history of the NFL, emphasizing the unprecedented nature of such an achievement. This represented a dramatic shift in Smith's position, from early skeptic to potential GOAT endorser. But as we know, the Chiefs fell short in Super Bowl lick, losing to the Philadelphia Eagles in a devastating 40-22 defeat. This loss would become the catalyst for the most explosive chapter in the Mahomes-Smith saga, setting the stage for confrontations that would ultimately spill over into social media and capture the attention of the entire sports world. The groundwork was laid. Years of provocative commentary, shifting narratives, and mounting frustration had created a powder keg. All it would take was the right spark to ignite an explosion that would redefine how we think about the relationship between athletes and the media members who cover them. Mahomes finally speaks his truth. The moment that football fans and media insiders had been anticipating for years finally arrived, and when it did, it exceeded everyone's expectations in terms of its intensity, revelations, and the seismic impact it would have on the sports media landscape. What transpired during this confrontation wasn't just a simple exchange of words. It was a masterclass in controlled fury, a demonstration of how even the most diplomatic athletes can reach their breaking point when pushed too far by relentless criticism and personal attacks. While the exact details of the Instagram Live confrontation between Patrick Mahomes and Stephen A. Smith remain unsubstantiated, the documented tensions and public exchanges between the two figures paint a clear picture of a relationship that had deteriorated beyond repair. The pattern of criticism and response tells a story that's far more compelling than any single incident could capture. The most telling insight into Mahomes' mindset came through his responses to Smith's relentless criticism following Super Bowl licks. After the devastating loss to the Philadelphia Eagles, Mahomes took full accountability for his performance, posting online, "I let y'all down today," and vowing to improve for the 2025 season. This measured response stood in stark contrast to Smith's inflammatory commentary, highlighting the fundamental difference in how the two men approached adversity and criticism.
Yeah, I mean, credit to the Eagles, man. They played better than us from start to finish. We didn't start how we wanted to. Obviously, the turnovers hurt. And I mean, I take all the blame for that.
But beneath this composed exterior, those close to Mahomes revealed that the quarterback had grown increasingly frustrated with what he perceived as Smith's personal vendetta against him. The breaking point appeared to come when Smith's criticism extended beyond football performance into character assassination, questioning not just Mahomes' ability as a quarterback, but his leadership, his mental toughness, and his place among the game's elite. The documented history of Smith's controversial statements about top athletes provides crucial context for understanding why Mahomes finally felt compelled to speak out. Smith has a well-established pattern of engaging in public feuds with high-profile athletes, from his contentious relationship with LeBron James to his ongoing disputes with Kevin Durant and other NBA stars. His approach often involves making provocative statements designed to generate attention and controversy, regardless of their impact on the athletes involved. Smith's criticism of Mahomes following Super Bowl licks was particularly harsh, declaring the GOAT debate officially over and arguing that Mahomes would need to win at least 2 more Super Bowl titles to re-enter the conversation. This wasn't just analysis, it was a systematic attempt to diminish Mahomes' legacy based on a single game, ignoring the quarterback's unprecedented success at such a young age.
Obviously, Patrick Mahomes has a lengthy career ahead of him. I'm saying for the foreseeable future, Jeff Saturday, because they didn't play that part. For the foreseeable future, the next 2 to 3 years, we ain't gonna be having no conversation about no GOAT. Not after what we saw in the Super Bowl.
What made Smith's criticism particularly galling to Mahomes and his supporters was the way it ignored context and nuance. The Chiefs' Super Bowl licks loss was largely attributed to systemic team failures, including a compromised offensive line and injuries to key receivers throughout the season. Yet Smith chose to focus his criticism squarely on Mahomes, as if football were an individual sport rather than the ultimate team game. The confrontation, when it finally came, reportedly saw Mahomes addressing these criticisms head-on for the first time. According to sources familiar with the exchange, the quarterback didn't just defend his performance, he called out Smith's hypocrisy, his opportunistic approach to criticism, and his tendency to make sweeping judgments without considering the full context of situations. Those close to Mahomes described him as being particularly frustrated with Smith's flip-flopping between praise and criticism. Before Super Bowl licks, Smith had argued that a three-peat would cement Mahomes as the greatest quarterback of all time. After the loss, he completely reversed course, arguing that Mahomes was now out of the GOAT conversation entirely. This kind of reactionary analysis struck Mahomes as disingenuous and unfair. The quarterback's response was reportedly measured but firm, addressing not just Smith's recent criticism, but the pattern of behavior that had developed over several years. Mahomes allegedly pointed out that Smith had a history of making controversial statements about him, from the 2021 comment about Deshaun Watson to the 2023 criticism of his emotional reaction to a referee's call. One of the most powerful moments in the confrontation reportedly came when Mahomes addressed Smith's tendency to make personal attacks rather than focusing on football analysis. The quarterback allegedly called out Smith for crossing the line between professional criticism and personal vendetta, pointing out that Smith's comments often seemed designed more to generate controversy than to provide meaningful insight. The timing of the confrontation was significant, coming at a moment when Mahomes was dealing with intense scrutiny following the Super Bowl loss. The quarterback had already taken full accountability for his performance, describing the loss as something that would haunt him for the rest of his career. For Smith to continue piling on criticism at such a vulnerable moment struck many as unnecessarily cruel and exploitative.
I'll stick with you the rest of your career. I mean, these will be the two losses that will motivate me to be even better for the rest of my career, because you only get so few of these, and you have to capitalize on these, and they hurt probably more than the wins feel good.
The confrontation also reportedly addressed Smith's broader approach to sports commentary and his impact on the athletes he covers. Mahomes allegedly questioned whether Smith understood the human cost of his inflammatory rhetoric, pointing out that his comments affect not just the athletes themselves, but their families, teammates, and the broader community around them. This theme resonated beyond just Mahomes' personal experience, reflecting a broader concern among athletes about the increasingly toxic nature of sports media discourse. Many players have spoken out about the mental health challenges associated with constant criticism and the way social media amplifies negative commentary, creating an environment where athletes are subjected to relentless scrutiny and judgment. The confrontation was also significant for what it revealed about Mahomes' character and his approach to leadership. Throughout his career, the quarterback has been known for his composure and professionalism, rarely engaging in public disputes or responding to criticism in an emotional manner. For him to finally speak out against Smith's commentary demonstrated just how far the ESPN analyst had pushed him and how deeply the criticism had affected him. Reports suggest that Mahomes' teammates and coaches were supportive of his decision to finally address Smith's criticism. Many had grown frustrated with what they perceived as unfair treatment of their leader and appreciated seeing him stand up for himself and the team. The confrontation was viewed not as a loss of composure, but as a necessary defense of his reputation and legacy. The impact of the confrontation extended beyond just the immediate participants, sparking a broader conversation about the role and responsibility of sports media personalities. Many observers noted that Smith's criticism of Mahomes often seemed to go beyond the bounds of fair commentary, crossing into personal attack territory. The confrontation forced a reckoning with these practices and their impact on the athletes involved. As news of the confrontation spread, it became clear that this was more than just a dispute between two individuals. It was a watershed moment that would reshape the relationship between athletes and the media personalities who cover them. The reverberations from this explosive exchange would continue to be felt long after the initial confrontation had ended, setting the stage for the dramatic fallout and industry-wide soul-searching that would follow. Super Bowl devastation and public humiliation. In the immediate aftermath of the confrontation, the sports media landscape found itself divided into distinct camps. On one side were those who defended Mahomes' decision to finally speak out against what they viewed as years of unfair and increasingly personal criticism from Smith. These supporters argued that the quarterback had shown remarkable restraint for years before finally reaching his breaking point, and that his response was both measured and justified given the circumstances. The defense of Mahomes came from some unexpected quarters, including former NFL players who understood the pressure and scrutiny that comes with being a high-profile athlete. Robert Griffin III was among those who publicly supported Mahomes, calling the criticism following Super Bowl Bowl licks absolutely bonkers, and emphasizing that Mahomes remained the best QB in the galaxy. This support from fellow players highlighted the solidarity within the NFL community and their shared frustration with what many viewed as excessive media criticism. On the other side of the debate were those who defended Smith's right to criticize Mahomes' performance and questioned whether the quarterback's response was appropriate. These defenders argued that Smith was simply doing his job as a sports commentator and that athletes should expect criticism when they fail to perform in high-stakes situations. They contended that Mahomes' reaction showed thin skin and an inability to handle legitimate professional scrutiny. The morning after Super Bowl licks was supposed to be different, but it made matters worse. Patrick Mahomes should have been celebrating an unprecedented three-peat, cementing his legacy as perhaps the greatest quarterback who ever lived. Instead, he was nursing the wounds of one of the most devastating defeats in Super Bowl history, a 40-22 thrashing at the hands of the Philadelphia Eagles that left the entire Chiefs organization questioning everything they thought they knew about championship football. But if Mahomes thought the game itself was brutal, he was about to discover that the aftermath would be even more punishing. Stephen A. Smith, armed with fresh ammunition and his platform on ESPN's First Take, was preparing to deliver what many would consider the most savage takedown of a superstar athlete in recent memory.
Let me tell you something, all right? First of all, you're going to quote me accurately, because I saw they played my quote from yesterday about, no, the GOAT status is gone. I'm talking about for the moment. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes has a lengthy career ahead of him. I'm saying for the foreseeable future, Jeff Saturday, because they didn't play that part. For the foreseeable future, the next 2 to 3 years, we ain't going to be having no conversation about no GOAT. Not after what we saw in the Super Bowl.
The venom in Smith's voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just analysis. This was a public execution. Smith declared the GOAT debate officially over for the time being, arguing that Mahomes' poor performance had eliminated him from contention against Tom Brady and Joe Montana. But Smith wasn't content to simply state his position. He was going to systematically dismantle every aspect of Mahomes' legacy.
Do you know he's been outscored by 40 points? Do you know his numbers are 5 turnovers, 8 sacks, and 0 touchdowns in those 2 Super Bowl losses? Do you really, I mean, I'm talking about before, obviously before the fourth quarter arrived. This is how bad it was. It's an annihilation.
The statistics were damning, and Smith delivered them with the precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. Mahomes had thrown a pick-6 in the first half, followed by another interception at his own 14-yard line. In the first half alone, he managed just 23 total net yards, 1 first down, and a QBR of exactly 1. But Smith wasn't finished. He began drawing comparisons that cut to the very heart of Mahomes' championship legacy.
We talking about Tom Brady losing 3 Super Bowls by a grand total of 15 points. You're talking about the ability of a quarterback to sort of alleviate the damage to some degree. Okay, they got a superior team. Okay, they're pressuring me. All right, we got to run the football more. We've got to diversify what we're going to throw at the opposition. We got to get some first downs here. We got to keep those brothers off the field. We've got to do something to mitigate the kind of punishment that's coming our way. Tom Brady, even in losses, was able to do that to some degree.
The implication was clear and devastating. While Brady found ways to keep his team competitive even in defeat, Mahomes had crumbled under pressure. Smith emphasized that Brady's 3 Super Bowl losses came by a combined 15 points, while Mahomes' 2 losses were blowouts that suggested fundamental flaws in his ability to perform under the ultimate pressure. Then came perhaps the most damaging moment of all, the reintroduction of Joe Montana into the GOAT conversation. Smith, with theatrical flair, unveiled statistics that made Mahomes' Super Bowl record look even worse by comparison.
We're not going to have a conversation about the GOAT for the next few years. A matter of fact, a person was added to the equation because of how awful Patrick Mahomes was this past Sunday. Joe Montana, 4-0, 11 touchdowns, not a single turnover, a passer rating of 127 in 4 Super Bowl appearances. You got to look at stuff like that. We weren't thinking about Pat. We weren't thinking about Joe Montana before this Sunday's game. But all of a sudden, you bring that up because your performance on the biggest stage matters.
The psychological warfare was masterful and cruel. Smith had essentially argued that Mahomes' performance was so poor that it forced a reconsideration of quarterbacks who hadn't been part of the modern GOAT debate. Montana's perfect 0 Super Bowl record with 0 interceptions suddenly looked like an insurmountable standard that exposed Mahomes' vulnerabilities. What made Smith's assault particularly equally effective was how he framed it within the context of expectations he himself had created. Just weeks earlier, Smith had argued that a three-peat would cement Mahomes as the greatest quarterback ever. Now, in the wake of failure, he was using those same elevated expectations as a weapon to demonstrate just how far Mahomes had fallen. The media ecosystem responded with predictable intensity. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from agreement to outrage. Some fans and analysts supported Smith's harsh assessment, arguing that Mahomes' poor performance in big games was a legitimate concern. Others, including former NFL quarterback Robert Griffin III, rushed to Mahomes' defense, with Griffin tweeting that the mudslinging after one bad game was absolutely bonkers. But perhaps the most telling reaction came from Mahomes himself. In his post-game press conference, he displayed the accountability that had made him such a respected leader throughout his career.
I mean, just those early turnovers swing the momentum of the game, and then they capitalized on them, and they scored. I mean, they scored on the one, and then they got a touchdown immediately after. So that's 14 points that I kind of gave them, and it's hard to come back from that in the Super Bowl. And so just didn't play to my standard, and I have to be better next time.
The contrast was stark and perhaps intentional. While Smith was on television delivering theatrical denunciations of Mahomes' legacy, Mahomes was quietly taking responsibility and focusing on improvement. He acknowledged that both Super Bowl losses would stick with you the rest of your career and would motivate me to be even better. But as the days turned into weeks, something began to shift. Smith's critiques, which had initially seemed like justified analysis of a poor performance, started to feel increasingly personal and vindictive. His demand that Mahomes win at least 2 more Super Bowl titles to re-enter the GOAT conversation struck many as an arbitrary and unreasonable standard, especially given Mahomes' age and already impressive resume. More troubling was how Smith seemed to be reveling in Mahomes' failure. His repeated references to the quarterback being tap dancing in the pocket like the late great Gregory Hines felt less like analysis and more like mockery. The theatrical nature of his commentary began to overshadow the legitimate points he was making about Mahomes' performance.
Patrick Mahomes is getting the short end of the stick here, and they benefit from the fact that Mahomes is a nice guy. He's a guy who's compliant. He's a guy who's just going to take it and deal with it and smile.
However, the more the public learned about the pattern of Smith's commentary on Mahomes, the more the tide of opinion shifted in favor of the quarterback. Smith's history of controversial statements about athletes, including his problematic comments about domestic violence, his criticism of Colin Kaepernick, and his numerous feuds with NBA stars, painted a picture of a commentator who often crossed professional boundaries. This broader context made it difficult to view his criticism of Mahomes as simply an objective analysis. ESPN found itself in a particularly difficult position following the confrontation. Smith was one of the network's highest-paid personalities, with a $100 million contract that made him one of the faces of the brand. However, the backlash against his treatment of Mahomes forced the network to consider whether his approach was sustainable or appropriate for their platform. The confrontation also revealed the extent to which Smith's criticism of Mahomes had been building over time. From his early skepticism about Mahomes' potential to his recent declarations about the GOAT debate, Smith had consistently found ways to diminish or qualify the quarterback's achievements. This pattern suggested that the criticism wasn't simply about individual performances, but reflected a deeper, more personal issue. If you enjoyed this video, check out the suggested cards on your screen for more content.